This conference will now be recorded.
There's Jason.
Lou.
Okay, that's our quorum, right? Let me just find my script and we'll get going. All right, so I call this Planning Commission meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. The role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearing examiner, or a court. Tonight's Planning Commission is held as a conference call to comply with the governor's stay home, stay healthy orders. We'll follow the same procedures that we use for our in-person meetings. 2 opportunities for public to give comment tonight. Once at the beginning of the meeting for items that aren't on the agenda, and then following staff and applicant presentations for the items that are on the agenda. Please put your microphone or telephone on mute during the meeting to help with audio quality, and the meeting will be recorded. So let's see, on the agenda tonight we have, pardon me, we have a call to order, we have a roll call, citizen communication for items not on the agenda, agenda approval, consent items, we have a public hearing, then a discussion workshop, and perhaps some staff reports to round us out. So I think we're ready for the roll call, Janice.
Thank you. Brian Matson is excused. Jason Lugo.
Present.
Sam Nigro.
Here.
Bill Jensen.
Here. Making a break.
Tiffany Whitten. Thank you.
Okay. Now we've also got Travis Goddard, our Community Development Director, Melissa Johnson, Associate Planner, Janice Fisher, Colin Roll, she's our clerk, and Sarah Casal, did I say get your name right? Close. All right, from Ecology, joining us here tonight as well. I don't see anybody but commissioners and staff and Sarah, so I don't think there will be any testimony for items not on the agenda, but I'll wait a second just in case. Okay, I think if anybody shows up late and they want to give comment, I think we can roll with the punches and open it then, but we'll move on for now. Next up, I think, is approval of the agenda, which I will need a motion from Commissioner for.
Oh, I guess that could be me.
Fantastic.
I move that we approve the minutes from the last session. All those in favor, second that?
So just you filed up, not a big deal, but we got to do the agenda first, just to keep things straight. So a motion to approve the agenda would be
Yes.
just delightful.
Make a motion to approve the agenda. All those.
I second that motion.
All right, fantastic. Motion's been made and seconded by Jason and Sam. Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. And now we can move on to the minutes from our last meeting. I think that's all we've got on our consent items.
Yes, make a motion to approve the minutes from last Planning Commission meeting. All those, second that?
July was a long time ago, but last time.
Oh, Oh, wow.
No, it's just the presentation. You didn't say anything wrong.
Did we get a second for that? Sam
Uh,
will second that if we haven't.
all right, fantastic. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes from our February meeting. Unless there's any discussion. None. Anyone opposed to approving the minutes? All right, motion carries. Okay, so moving right along to our, sorry, tabbing between windows here. Moving on to our public hearing for the evening, which is a joint public hearing. Don't have many of those. Washington State Department of Ecology and the City of Woodland joint public hearing, Shoreline Master Program periodic review, CPA-20-001 and CEP-20-005. Woodland Shoreline Master Program periodic review proposes minor amendments to keep the SMP current with changes in state law since the last SMP update. Authority for the periodic review is based on Washington's Shoreline Management Act, Chapter 90.58 RCW, and related rules. The city has elected to use the optional joint review process to combine the local and ecology comment periods as allowed under WAC 173-26-104. Comments provided to the city will be reviewed by both the city and ecology. There's no need to send duplicates. There are several ways to submit comments. Please see the following options. I guess I don't need to say that. No one's listening. Okay. So I think, I guess I should ask if there's any conflicts of interest or ex parte communication from the commission. Any commissioners? Okay, I'm going to assume there aren't any since I didn't hear any, so we can move on to staff presentation.
Great, thank you. I will begin. So again, I'm Melissa Johnston. I'm Associate Planner with City of Woodland. I'll give the staff presentation tonight for the Shoreline Master Program periodic review for the public hearing. So again, tonight's public hearing is a joint hearing with Washington State Department of Ecology. We have Sarah Castle. She's Shoreline Planner with Department of Ecology here with us tonight. In tonight's staff presentation, I'll start off with a short recap of the Shoreline Master Program and our periodic review process for our newer commissioners, and if anybody joins us tonight for the first time. So we'll review our public participation efforts over this project, summarize proposed updates to the program text, discuss some proposed updates to the Woodland Shorelines Environmental Designations Map, and that'll brief you on the next steps for periodic review. Following the staff presentation, we'll have time for public comment, we'll have time for the commission to discuss, and then formulate your recommendation to council. So I'll begin the review with the Shoreline Management Act. This is a state act. It was adopted in 1972. The overarching goal of the act is to prevent the inherent harm and uncoordinated and piecemeal development of the state's shorelines. And the Shoreline Management Act requires that we have Shoreline Master Program. It requires this of all counties and most towns and cities like Woodland in Washington to have and implement Shoreline Master Programs. And it's in the Shoreline Master Program that we have our local land use policies and regulations that guides the use and the development of shorelines in our city. So these ensure that development along the shoreline is consistent with the state requirements, protects public health and safety, and ensures no net loss, ecological function by requiring restoration or mitigation. So shorelines defined as the state are located along lakes with 20 acres or larger surface area, and streams and rivers with 20 cubic feet per second of mean annual flow. And it includes uplands 200 feet landward of the water bodies, wetlands connected to them, and all of the 100-year floodplain, including the wetlands. So for Woodland, specifically for us, that is the shorelines of Horseshoe Lake and Lewis River. A look at shoreline uses around town. Primarily, we have public parks like Horseshoe Lake, residences, and commercial businesses along our shorelines. Here's a look at our Shoreline Mat. This is part of our Shoreline Master Program. We adopted this version in 2016. If you look at this map, the area outlined in purple is our existing city limits, and the dark black dotted line is our urban growth boundary. And then you can see along the edge of the map in the colored areas, there are labels that begin with a W and then a 2-digit number. These are our reaches that correspond to the Shoreline Program. And then on the left-hand side, you can see our legend with environmental designations. We have high intensity, urban conservancy, residential, recreation, and aquatic in water. So when you use the reach number and the environmental designation, that determines the land use rules that are allowed for that area of the shoreline jurisdiction. It's very much like our zoning map, and the setbacks and the uses that are allowed in each of these areas vary by the reach and the environmental designation. So I'll back out just a little bit so we can have a look at the bigger picture. The Shoreline Master Program also sets some overarching goals to improve and protect our shorelines. And we're not proposing tonight any changes to those goals of the program, but I include this now to help give kind of a higher level picture of what this program looks like. The goals of the Master Program can be found in Chapter 4, and you'll find the full descriptions there. Kind of the big picture concepts, but they're especially important for us to refer back to when we're doing other long-range plans to ensure that they're compatible and consistent with each other. So these goals, they're for ensuring appropriate conservation and development of the shorelines, protecting historic and cultural resources, conservation and restoration of shoreline resources, supporting economic development by prioritizing commercial, industrial, and residential developments that are dependent on their shoreline location, flood prevention and damage minimization, increasing the public's access to shorelines and opportunities for safe recreation, and protecting the shoreline as there's improvements to transportation and utility throughout the city, focusing on protecting the shoreline areas. So from this program, we have a few permit types that are derived from this, and I would put them in two categories. We have our exemption letters, and then we have substantial development permits, conditional use permits, and variances. And I would estimate of these, we probably issue about 4 to 6 shoreline permits per year in Woodland. Okay. Now, for the periodic review process, this is required of us by the state once every 8 years. Our next review is due in 2021. It's due soon. And our primary task is to make sure that our local Shoreline Master Program complies with state legislation, especially with any state legislation that's passed since our last review, which was in 2016. So updates will be pretty small this time, actually, because we did have a deeper review process back in 2016 to adopt this full program. But these updates now will ensure that our program stays current and stays flexible and responsive to changes that are occurring. We did hold a public participation process through our periodic review. So we've been providing information to the public about these changes that we're proposing and inviting participation throughout the periodic review process. We began in May 2020, and we started off with an overview presentation to Planning Commission, and we spoke to City Council at the beginning of the process, and then put together our project webpage. So since May, we have shared documents online, draft changes, map, the ecology checklist, an overview video. We've had 3 virtual open houses. And this is our third, our third presentation to Planning Commission. Our overview video we've had on our website, and we also posted on social media. And we sent out print notification as well through utility bill insert, direct mail to property owners on the shoreline, and 2 email notices. And we also published 3 notices in our local newspaper, The Reflector. And we conducted a survey, and the survey was shared on social media and on our website and through our email listserv. So just to tell you a little bit about the public meetings, again, the virtual open houses were over the summer, June, July, and August. We had our Planning Commission meetings. The main comments received through the virtual open houses were on the topics of stormwater quality, controlling stormwater, and the quality of stormwater, and then also discussions about more shoreline trails in our area. And this is important feedback that we can keep in mind even after the periodic review process is concluded. We can keep this in mind as we are working on improvements at Horseshoe Lake Park and a grant that Public Works is looking and securing to increase ADA access to Horseshoe Lake Park. So some of this feedback, while it may not get directly incorporated into our periodic review and changes in the program, it's been good feedback to get and carry forward. We also had a survey. We had 35 responses to our survey. 22 of the responses were from people in Woodland. 7 of them lived on the shoreline, 3 worked along the shoreline, and the top things that they noted recreation-wise was enjoying walking, swimming, fishing, boating, picnicking. They asked for more information about development standards and native plants. They our greatest asset, views and sceneries and active use of the shoreline were common answers there. Common requests for more trails, more ADA access, and more boat launches. And of our shoreline goals, the goals that seemed to resonate the most were public access and recreation. Okay. So again, we sent out 3 different kinds of notices. Our utility notice was a bill insert, and it went into all of the bills sent out, so that would have reached, and there was a link if it was electronic, or it was printed if they are mailed their bill. And so that would have reached 2,000 customers in Woodland, whether or not they lived on the shoreline. Our direct mailing to shoreline residents reached 245. And then we have an email listserv. If people signed up for notices on our website or did the survey, they were added to this listserv. And we sent out 2 email notices through that. In response to the letters, we did get a letter back that we had addressed throughout the workshop that was about our Shoreline Map proposed updates that Travis can speak more to in our question and answer if there's more questions about this. Okay. So for our 2021 periodic review, we're proposing adopting the state-initiated changes as updates to our local program, so we can match them at the state level. And so those are changes that are in RCWs and the WAC. And we were provided a checklist from Ecology that lists these changes out by year. We found changes to incorporate from 2019, 2017, 16, and 15. And we are also proposing tonight to adopt pre-designations for the Shoreline Map, and these are called pre-designations. So again, all the text updates, these are routine review, and the purpose of the review is consistency. Next, I'll give you an overview of the checklist. This was in the agenda packet, and we've seen this before in the workshop. So this gives you a look at the checklist, and it has each of the changes listed here and a more thorough description of what the update was at the state level, and offers us suggestions on how to incorporate it into our local code. So we took this handout and then went through this worksheet that we have discussed at our workshop. And for each of the recommended changes, we found where that was located in our code, and then listed how we propose to update our code in response. So we have our responses listed in the far right column. I think this is a new document for tonight to look at. This now is a brief overview table that shows you the location of each of our text changes and which state update it corresponds to. So this time in your agenda packet, you have actual draft ordinance to look at. So we have our whole Shoreline Master Program and the areas that we'll be removing, you can see in the strikeout text, and the new areas that we are updating, you can see in the red text. Okay. So this is, I think, the newest thing for us to talk about tonight. This is our Shoreline Environmental Designation map. We are going to suggest adopting pre-designations tonight. This will be for the areas between city limits and the urban growth boundary. Let's look. So let's look again. This is our current Shoreline Master Program map. And again, there's the reaches and the environmental designations and the legend to the left. Now, if we go a little closer up, you can see on our current map that there's some areas that are missing, they're unmapped, and where these areas are just outside our city limits, but inside the urban growth boundary. And then you can look on the right and see what the aerial looks like for that area. And so here's a close-up from our proposed map, and this will show you what the pre-shoreline environmental designations would look like. They're color-coded for what we would like to adopt. There is some overlap. This is a look at the Clark County Shoreline Program and a look at the Cowlitz County Shoreline Program, and you can see that they have, for those little slivers of area that weren't designated in our map, they are designated in theirs. So here's a look at the final proposed map with some annotations that will show you where we are proposing to adopt changes. There's nothing proposed to be changed with the original map. So the current SEDs will stay the same way, just that we're adding additional pre-SEDs. And the proposed pre-SEDs are based on the adjacent shoreline environmental designation, or they're based on the underlying shoreline environmental designation of the county. In your packet, there was a table, and this is our pre-shoreline environmental designation table that goes into detail each of the reaches and the reasons for selecting the specific designation, which again was based on the adjacent SED in the city or the underlying county SED. Second page of that table. And this is what the final map would look like. Okay, so the next steps will be for the Planning Commission to discuss any public feedback if anybody has joined us, develop your recommendation and for the proposed text changes and the map changes. we are sending this to Department of Commerce for the 60-day review, and then the recommendation will be sent to City Council for adoption. So for our discussion tonight and for question and answer, I'll field these questions, but I'd like to both invite Travis and Sarah to jump in if there's anything that you would like to add or address to any of the questions. Well, thank you.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Melissa. Since I do see one person joined us, I'll ask if there's anybody wants to give public testimony, which we would normally do at this point. So I'll pause for that. Okay. All right. Well, if Travis, yes.
So so it looks like Joe joined us, and I'm not sure whether he wants to take a moment before he makes a comment, but I just wanted to give a little bit of feedback from the staff's point of view. We are very cognizant of the fact that COVID-19 and what's happened over the last year has significantly affected our ability to reach out to the community in person. The MAP conversation is a good example of, I actually made the effort to call as many property owners who would be affected by those mapping changes. And I did get feedback from Andy Loud and Connie Taylor, who are the largest single property owners who were affected by the MAP jurisdiction or the MAP changes outside of the city limits, but in the urban growth boundary. And I must have spent an hour with Miss Taylor, and she had a concern that her upland outside of the floodway and in the city limits was zoned residential, but the area outside the city limits and in the floodway was getting a conservancy designation, and she had a bit of concern about that. And so we spent an hour talking about whether or not she wanted to request a residential designation be extended to the ordinary high water mark. But because the conservancy area is in the floodway, even if she was given a residential designation, she would not be able to develop that area. And in the end, it would function as conservancy because it was in the floodway. And since that's how the Cowlitz County shoreline designation existed in the shoreline program, in the end, she understood our reasoning and she actually submitted a second written comment letter in support of the change that was proposed for her property. And she saw the logic and she said she had a lot of confidence in the staff analysis and the recommendation by the staff. So it's an example of how we did everything we could possible to engage citizens, even though they weren't able to come into our normal open house kind of forum and have that conversation with us face to face.
Great, thanks, Travis. Yeah, we're all kind of adjusting, I suppose. I'm curious about that piece. Why, like, kind of what the story is. Did that just accrete since the city limits were established?
That is exactly it. That is land that has been deposited by river action over the decades, and their property, the ordinary high water mark was the original boundary of their property line and the city limits. And so that's why there's such a discrepancy in our map. And that discrepancy is not just on the shoreline map, it's on our city limits and our zoning and our comprehensive map as well. So we're going to have to address that with this document as well as those other two documents in the future. But
yeah, interesting.
And so this means, I'll add on to that question, that when if we are to move that city boundary out to the urban growth boundary, then the shoreline will be ready to come right into the shoreline program because of that pre-designation. And that could happen through an individual requesting to kind of annex out, or if we wanted to do a citywide project to change that boundary.
Okay.
And if I could add one more thing, part of the reason why this came up, because it wasn't on our radar at the start of the process, but there was a small water system in Clark County that had an emergency. They had arsenic in their water, and I think they had 8 customers, and they could not get drinking water from this Clark Public Utilities small drinking water system. And so they proposed to bore underneath the Lewis River and connect to the city water system in Misty Place, because that's the closest city water line. And when we were discussing this, because it was an emergency health exemption from the state health office, the question during our pre-app was, well, they need a county shoreline permit on the other side of the river because they're going to dig a hole and bore into the county. And when they pop out of the ground in the city of Woodland, theoretically, they needed a shoreline permit. So those parts were easy, but there's technically a gap underneath the river where they were not in Clark County jurisdiction and they were not in city jurisdiction. They were technically in Cowlitz County jurisdiction. And we contacted Cowlitz County and said, hey, they're going to be boring 40 feet under the river. Do you believe they need a shoreline permit? And the county's answer was no, there are going to be no physical impacts to the shoreline jurisdiction that they felt needed a shoreline review. But it led us to understand that, gee, it seems really dumb that third party is involved when they didn't need to, and we needed to fix the map, and that's how this issue was raised in the first place.
That's interesting. Maybe, unrelated for our discussion tonight, but I'm curious about, as that continues to happen, who, what ownership ramifications are, as the river moves. I don't know if that depends on individual deeds or what, but there's some history in my family. When the river moved, lost about 60% of the property because the deed didn't say to the ordinary high water mark. That made the parcel lots smaller. Anyway, well, great. Doesn't look like we do have any public testimony. So I guess at this point, we should, if the commission has any questions for staff, now's the time. Or just any thoughts at all. I think we can just move right into chatting about it. Well, seem to be very, very opinionated about shorelines this evening. So
I read a lot about shorelines, and I read the staff report and all the information, and it was really comprehensive and really detailed. So kudos to Melissa and Travis. Very, very specific. So just wanted to say that looks really, really good. And no more comments.
okay. I agree. Yeah, thanks for all the work. It was very clear. All right, Sammy, have any thoughts?
No, I'm just following along. Thank you.
Okay.
No.
All right, great. Well, yeah, I think they all, all the changes make sense to me. And especially this, it seems like this is kind of just keeping up with changes at the state level. I guess the one question I did have is, this seems like a pretty minor, I imagine it's still a lot of work goes into preparing it, but a relatively minor revision. Do we have a schedule for I guess, a deeper dive or a more comprehensive review, or is that just kind of ad hoc when it seems like it's necessary?
That might be a question for Sarah to answer.
Okay.
So the Shoreline Master Program amendment this time around is identified the periodic review cycle is for keeping up with land use regulations written under the Growth Management Act, and then also changes in local circumstances and changes in the statute and rule. Any amendments outside of those are discretionary to the local government. So certainly if you all wanted to change other things, you can at anytime, or you can also change them in the next review cycle, which I have heard is going to change from every 8 years to every 10 years, is currently under consideration in front of the state legislature to coincide with the federal census data. And so it'll be reflected in a little bit better, which makes a lot of sense to me. So most communities that I work with are just doing those things that are in the checklist, especially in Cowlitz County, who most of the communities only just finished their comprehensive update, which was pretty much a rewrite of their entire master program within the last 5 to 6 years. So, because everybody was a little bit late finishing the process, so 8 years hadn't elapsed for you to use the program. So I feel like I feel like that you did more than the average community as far as outreach and getting folks involved. And you did a thorough job at looking at what needed to be changed. And the issues that you uncovered with the map are really good issues to deal with. And those are the kind of issues that are encouraged to fix at this time with the state funds. So I don't know what you have out there to consider as far as other issues with your master program, but you certainly can propose an amendment at any time, as long as there is an amendment in with Ecology that they are considering for approval or not, is what the rule is. Is that?
Yeah, I think that,
okay.
that is. Thank you very much, Sarah. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess, beyond that, as I was reading through, I just noticed one kind of, typographical issue that not with any of your amendments, but with the, or any of your changes, but with the existing language. And it's kind of funny enough that we might want to talk about it just to try to see what it actually means. And that is on page 2-12. Which I'm having to find again. And just the first whole section there about hazard trees. The first sentence just ends, I would say, inappropriately, in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So seems like something, as long as we're digging into it, maybe worth trying to clarify. So just in case anyone's having trouble finding it, it's in under hazard tree. It says dead or dying trees, dead parts of live trees, or unstable live trees due to structural defects or other factors that are within striking distance of people or full stop. So I'm wondering what was intended to go beyond that for. I think it's probably structures or property.
Property. Property is the standard language, I think.
Okay. That's great. I think that's a super easy one to fix, I think.
So
Just throw
tell,
property. Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you.
Not at all.
That may be with the version that we sent you, that might have been a problem. The original text has a complete hazard tree definition. Would you like me to read that to you?
Sure. Yeah.
It says hazard trees, dead or dying trees, dead parts of live trees, or unstable live trees due to structural defects or other factors that are within striking distance of people, or hazard trees have the potential to cause property damage, personal injury, or fatality in the event of failure.
So that's what I've got. But that seems like two different, I mean, it seems like there's a period, at least
yeah.
a missing word. Maybe just throw a property after that.
Oh.
Word. Is that,
I
see
see
what I'm talking about now?
Okay. I thought you were saying that it ended at where people-
Yeah, sorry. No, I was not clear. That there is a second
see.
sentence there.
The
Just that
sentence in
first
the middle
sentence.
there. Property does seem like it's likely the word that's missing. So thank you for pointing it out. We'll make sure to get that in there.
Great. Other than that, you know, I think you did some great work, and it looks all the changes look good to me. Nothing terribly controversial. So I'm happy with it. So assuming Jason and Sam are also all right with it, I think. And it doesn't look like we've got anybody new that would want to give comment. I think, let me just see what this chat says. Okay, just listening, perfect. In that case, I think we're ready for a motion.
How do we do this? Say a motion to approve? Is that the terminology we use? Okay, I make a motion, we approve.
I second that. I will second that.
Okay, fantastic. Great work, Sam. Thanks. Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion before we take a vote? Doesn't look like it. All right, Janice, would you take a roll call vote for this one?
Sure. Just click another couple of buttons here and I'll be ready to do that. Okay. Jason Lugo.
Yes.
Sam Nigro.
Yes.
Tel Jensen.
Yes.
Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. All right, great work, everybody. And yeah, thanks again that's good to hear from outside that your outreach was really good too. So once again, thanks for doing that and all the work that went into this. And I guess I didn't already, so I should close the public hearing. I'm gonna close that public hearing. And now we can move on to our discussion workshop and retooling our code, which seems fun. I'm pretty excited about this one. And thanks, Sarah, you're gone. Okay.
Bye, Sarah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Melissa, could you put up the presentation? Thank you. So the last time we had a discussion here, we talked about the housing affordability, and that was several months ago. And unfortunately, we've been kind of buried with a bunch of other projects, so this is kind of, haven't had a chance to bring this back to you with Kirkland Senior Living and the other stuff you've been doing. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about the housing action plan and our code review. So the next slide is a little bit of a refresher. So the State House bill we're talking about is 1923, and the idea is to increase urban residential building capacity. The idea behind that is pursuit of residential building capacity and housing affordability projects, code changes, and housing projects. That's the purpose of the bill. So we had talked about a affordability in November, and the stuff that we're still working on is housing analysis, the affordability, supply, building trends, growth trends, housing needs assessment, and the other big leg to the stool is the code analysis and making some code change suggestions. And again, our Retooling Our Code program, we've been putting code fixes on our list since 2018. So we already have a significant number of the issues that are behind this grant already on our list, and we've thought about it for a while. So I had gotten a chance to do some of the code review, and the simpler changes, I made some suggestions. So I wanted you to get a chance to look at those as early as you could, and they are attached to the agenda today. And again, like we did for the Shoreline program, we're trying to package these into small bites for you to maybe take one or two a day and think about them, and without having to take on a large staff report that covers everything all at once to overload you. So the State House bill, it had a bunch of targets they were looking at for increasing that building capacity. And what you have in front of you is the list of what's on there. Not all of them are applicable for Woodland, and those are the ones on the right. We are not near light rail. We are not near transit corridors. We haven't done a sub-area plan. We don't have planned action provisions, and we're not using a form-based code. But what we have the opportunity to take a look at are the stuff on the left. They are different housing types, clustered developments, accessory dwellings, SEPA exemptions, infill, changing our short plats, allowing duplexes on corner lots, and net density of 6 units per acre. I thought those were all low-hanging fruit that we could address in our code without having to make big substantive changes. And this grant, so it provides us the opportunity to have that conversation. For the next slide, I'll go through each one of those really quickly. Like I said, you have individual staff reports attached to the agenda that you can take a look at. And we are not technically in a work session or a public hearing at this point, so we can have a quick discussion, but that substantive discussion will have to occur in a public forum at a public hearing. So I just want to point that out. So one of the things that we should seriously take a look at is our current code allows short subdivisions or short plats up to 4 lots. But state rules actually allow us to go up to 9 lots as a short subdivision. Now, the difference between a short subdivision and a regular subdivision is short subdivisions are administratively approved by staff, whereas subdivisions have to go to the Planning Commission and the City Council for approval. And so there's substantial bureaucratic costs and time delays for this larger project for the subdivision process. So this allows us to create more opportunities for medium-sized subdivisions up to 9 lots without having to go through the full bureaucratic, so we can save applicants time and money. And it doesn't necessarily increase density, but it may encourage small developers to look at a little project with a few extra lots and save them time and money. So that would serve our desire to increase housing opportunities by doing so. So what I was able to find is that these code changes are very simple. As a matter of fact, I only had to search and replace the number 4 with the number 9 4 times, and then The definition for subdivision, I had to change that from 5 or more lots to 10 or more lots. So this is a change that we can reduce bureaucratic hurdles by changing essentially 5 words in our ordinance. And so it seemed like low-hanging fruit that just made sense. So that agenda memo is completed with full suggestions. So we don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time on that unless you think that's controversial. So the next slide, do you maybe want to give me a little feedback on each of those as we go, or do you want me to just zip through them and then ask you if you have any questions?
I don't know which feels better to you. I think either way works for me. I don't know if Sam or Jason have feelings on that, but
how about I take a quick pause, and if you have anything to say, you can pipe up and we'll stop.
okay.
Okay. So the second one is an aspirational idea in the RCW that would like us to get to 6 units per acre. And this is actually consistent with the Clark County countywide planning policies. And our comp plan needs to be updated to include this 6 units per acre, because it's stated in there, but only for multifamily. No current single family zone achieves a 6 unit per acre net. So our zoning, which is this first column, we have low density residential, 6,000 lots, 7,200 lots, 8,500 lots, and 10,000 lots. Little quirk of our code is we have this zoning, but there is actually no LDR 10,000 square foot lot property zoned in the city. So in this case, it's not on the map, but we have the regulations for it. The units per acre is the next column. So gross units per acre in the LDR 6 and the LDR 7.2 do show a 7.3 and a 6.1 units per acre. But when you actually do a subdivision and you dedicate right of way for the road, you make improvements, plus you put in the water and sewer, the actual net density is, they're all less than 5 units per acre. And so that is one problem with our existing code. If you can go to the next slide, Melissa. But it's not necessarily a bad thing, because, thank you, because there are tools in our code that do allow for higher densities. For example, the planned unit residential development code, but again, there's a disincentive in that same code because it requires larger projects and it comes with some complex regulations. So it's a disincentive for people to actually want to increase density unless they're doing a big subdivision. Also, we have accessory dwelling units. It's a tool we have, but we're going to talk about ADUs separately, and there are some restrictions in our code which kind of deter people from getting those extra units that they are entitled to. Manufactured home subdivisions, we just don't do a lot of those. And flexible lot sizes and width standards, that is in our code, but they are not effective. Now, this is actually one of the memos that I have done a lot of research on, and it ended up at 4 or 5 pages. And I have suggested some quick code changes that we can use. And so this is another one of the items where essentially the analysis and the suggestions are done. The good thing is we can achieve this goal pretty quickly simply by adding a 6 unit per acre minimum in the multifamily zone. So in other words, in our medium density and high density, you can go up to 25 acres, 35 acres, but we don't actually have a minimum on the bottom end. So developer could put single family homes, low density single family homes in our multifamily and high density zones. So we can achieve this state goal simply by adding that minimum of 6 units per acre. and it would be consistent with every other single family zone in our community. So to me, that's kind of a low bar, but it would be a simple way for us to address the state RCW. And then there's some other things that we're going to discuss later on.
Can we pause on that for just a second? So, you know, I think it looks like, I guess what I immediately kind of tuned into was that 80% number for, you know, when you're looking at, you know, net lots per acre. And I think, you know, dealing with the other side of that, which is the, you know, the size of the lots, or the, you know, dwellings per lot, is a great idea. But I think we can also, like, I think there's actually some wiggle room on that 80% too. That comes from a couple of places. One is our roads are just huge, and they're much bigger than they need to be. And that seems like another place that would be, you know, relatively simple to change. You know, we might have to fight the fire marshal over it, but fire marshal doesn't run the city. And I think, you know, I also noticed as I was looking around for, you know, what requirements are, I saw that our code explicitly encourages cul-de-sacs and sort of dendritic patterns. And I think that is just foolish. And I think it wastes, you know, it wastes space basically, and hurts that, you know, that net number that we're looking at. Anyway, I think there are, you know, I think we could also, I think what you're talking about here is great. Yeah, I'm all for it. But I think there, you know, I don't think we need to write off the single family zones either. I think, you know, addressing that, the net side of that could also be helpful. And just real quick, what form-based codes, we just like don't want to do it.
So the grant is through June, and it is something that we could explore, but the idea that we would be able to try and tackle any kind of constructive form-based code in the time that we were given, I just felt that we weren't courageous enough to try and tackle that.
That seems very reasonable. Okay, yeah, that I'm satisfied there. That's a good point. All right, great, thanks.
Okay, next slide, Melissa, thank you. So the SEPA code, which is the State Environmental Policy Act, is kind of one of these funky codes that is a land use code, but it's kind of the grandfather of a lot of land use codes. It was passed in the 1970s or 1971, and it has had minor changes, but the land use codes and the Growth Management Act have significantly changed the landscape of land use regulations since it was adopted. And so we are able to address a lot of the impacts from development with other codes that didn't exist back in the 70s. And the SEPA exemption list recognizes that it continues to evolve, because as development regulations change, there's less and less need for SEPA to be considered. And one of the big changes that has occurred, and that is infill and multi-use projects can now be exempt from SEPA under certain circumstances. And we are able to make some changes to our SEPA code that would allow for small developments to occur without having to go through SEPA. And this is one of those examples. I am kind of approaching this from the side because we can make some, and if you take a look at the agenda memo attached, that I did the analysis and I have identified ways for us to adopt an exemption that would allow us to exempt small infill projects. And for example, we've had a couple short plats on CC Street and Washington Street where large lots with small, very small residences on them. And the applicant proposed a 4-lot short plat and 2-lot short plat next door to each other. And so it was a total of 6 lots in these 2 subdivisions. And they could theoretically have qualified for SEPA exemptions, which would have saved them about $1,000 plus a little bit of bureaucracy. What we would have to recognize, or what I'm recognizing in the agenda memo, and that is we can adopt this SEPA exemption, but we don't really have a definition for infill. And I think as we get to the public hearing on this, if you're so inclined, we can either adopt the exemption and then put it on our work plan for adopting future infill standards, or we can try and cobble something together quickly and see whether we want to attack infill before June. But we're kind of running out of time. I would almost like to adopt this exemption and then stick a pin in it so we could come back and reevaluate what do we think infill works for Woodland and give it a little more attention than it might deserve at this point.
I think I'd be okay with, you know, either of those approaches, to be honest. Like if you get a, you know, a suitable, or if anybody finds a, you know, a reasonable definition of infill that we think could work, and, you know, we get that ready in time, that seems fine. If it doesn't happen and we, yeah, put it on the agenda to come back to, that seems all right too. It seems like, you know, the time sensitive part is, I don't know, I guess I don't know the details of what's time sensitive and what's not, but, you know, it seems like getting a start is good.
Okay, so the next one is definition or duplexes structures on corner lots. And I actually live in a neighborhood that has many of these, so I've included some photos. But the idea is they're trying to increase density by making duplexes more viable options in development. And duplexes on corner lots are in low-hanging fruit because conditional use permits are a substantial delay. They have a lot of bureaucracy and costs associated with them because it requires us to go to the hearings examiner, and value added by going to the hearings examiner isn't necessarily substantial for the time and effort that we put into it. Whereas duplexes on corner lots are great because if you have one driveway off of each street, it looks like a single family home to the average person driving through the neighborhood. So it doesn't affect neighborhood, but it allows you to essentially significantly increase density in a normal residential lot. So we had talked about previously the density in some of these residential developments are, you know, 4 or 5 units per acre, but if you add a couple duplexes in there, we can easily achieve that target of 6 units per acre, but it doesn't change the type of housing that's built in an individual development. And this is an easy tool because only one section of the code would need to be changed. So it's another one of these small changes, and not everybody is going to use it, but it's an extra tool that's available. So if you can go to the next slide, Melissa. So this is my neighborhood, and I point this out because when you're looking on Google Maps, you don't necessarily notice it, but each one of these arrows represents 3 duplexes within 1 block of each other, and each one of them is designed so that there's a driveway on a separate street frontage.
Nice.
And so if you go to the next slide, this is what one of those houses looks like. You can see the red truck on the left is in one of the units, and then the gray and black car on the right, they're actually part of the other side of the duplex, and so their driveways are actually separated as if they're separate single-family residential units. Next slide. I think this one's a little lighter. So you see that there's a house or a car on the left, back around the corner, a silver sedan, and then the unit on the right on Olympic Street, it has a SUV in front of the garage plus a house in front of the front door. But looking at it, you don't necessarily realize that both of these driveways go to the exact same structure. So duplexes with separate frontage is actually a very efficient way to increase density, but it doesn't change the character of the neighborhood at all because it's the exact same design structure as the rest of the subdivision. So any questions about that? Okay, so the next one is very similar to that. It's talking about diversity of housing types that are allowed by our code. Oh, sorry.
Popular guy.
Sorry about that. So the RCW is asking us to add at least one of the following to our residential code, and that's duplex, triplex, fourplex, sixplex, stacked flat, townhouse, courtyard apartments. So these tools can be added to either our single family or our multifamily zones. The RCW doesn't actually have a preference one way or the other. Now we currently allow duplexes in our multifamily and our single family zones, but again, it requires a conditional use permit for each one, as opposed to making it simpler to provide variety. And if you go to the next slide, I'm going to run this together with the next one, because the next desire from the RCW is for us to have zoning diversity for residential structures. And in this case, it's only asking us to allow one of these uses in a new zone where it is not currently allowed. And I think this is another low-hanging fruit, because where we have duplexes, I think it wouldn't be that hard for us to allow courtyard apartments, townhouses, or any one of these larger structures to occur in our multifamily zone where it's not currently a listed use. And so it doesn't make sense for us to have multifamily zoning and we allow up to 25 units or 35 units per acre, but we don't allow anything other than theoretically single family residential or apartment multifamily structures. We don't provide any opportunity to do quads or sixplexes or some of these funky new designs, because they're not specifically listed, even though we will entertain them if somebody proposed them. I think if we identify them as a permitted use in the zone, we might get some creative juices flowing with our small lot owners, and they might come up with a new funky idea that we want to encourage. We just don't currently do it in our code.
I think that one's great, especially because I think for whatever reason, multifamily units in this town seem to have a lot of enemies, and I think at least part of that is that the multifamily structures that we do have are not particularly attractive. And I think some of these options really look a lot nicer and are more just pleasant to be around and walk by. So I don't know. This seems great. I'm for it.
Okay, and these two agenda memos that I have attached to your packet, they are essentially hollow, just FYI, let you know that this is one of the items that we're going to be spending more time on. I didn't actually get to spend a lot of additional time other than to prepare this matrix. And what this shows you is single family residential dwellings, for example, they are permitted in all of our zones. And then it starts to show the hurdles for the duplexes. triplexes and fourplexes are not permitted anywhere in the city. Then multifamily dwellings are not permitted in any of the low density. So this is just kind of a matrix to show you what are the current hurdle problems with our codes as we have this discussion going forward. So I thought this was a good visual representation of the bureaucratic hurdles in our code. Next slide. Accessory dwelling units. We currently may have an issue with this one. What the RCW is asking us to do is allow ADUs in one or more zoning districts where they are currently prohibited. But I think ADUs are currently permitted in all of our codes or all of our zoning districts. We just need to tweak our ADU code to kind of remove some of the disincentives. We want to encourage people to create little mini apartments or mother-in-law apartments, or add a tiny home to their lot if they have enough room. And we have some kind of old-fashioned requirements, and the kind of the leading example is our accessory dwelling units require the property owner to live in one of the units, either the primary home or the accessory dwelling unit. And this kind of drives me crazy, because once that accessory dwelling unit is built, I have no way of verifying or verifying whether one of the owners is living in one of the units, because
Doesn't it require a signed affidavit? It's so silly.
that's a
You're
good
right.
question. That would be in the code, but
I think it is. I think it's in the code right now.
The person who builds it may have a sick mother-in-law who's going to live in that apartment, but 5 years from now, if she's either healthy or has passed away, there would be no way for me to verify that, let alone make them remove the accessory dwelling unit. It's ridiculous. So I don't think we even want to try that. So that's a great example of how we need to fix our code. And
well, I bet you'd get, I don't know, I bet you'd get credit for this, just because, you know, even though they're not technically prohibited, sort of, you know, in practice they kind of are.
Yeah. I think this is an example of removing the conditional use permit. Is a good example for us to argue that we're permitting uses that otherwise are prohibited. Not prohibited, but determined to the point that they're prohibited due to the bureaucracy. So again, this is another thing that's been on our code list for a while. And that's a big discussion that I was prepared to have tonight. So we'll follow up with a larger discussion of that at one of our next meetings. So the next step, I wanted to give you an idea that we have a bunch of data pulled for our vacant lands to take a look at how much developable land is left in the city. We've reviewed the existing codes, reviewing the comp plan and the other documents. That's kind of ongoing, but the majority of that is done. Housing survey with the Cowlitz-Wilkicum Council of Government. We haven't actually seen the results, but they've had that up. And so we collected the same data as the COG for the other jurisdictions within the Cowlitz-Wilkicum Council of Government area. So we'll be able to compare, hopefully, our responses to the other jurisdictions and see what we think locally as opposed to the regional thoughts on that survey. Performing the housing analysis, that we still have to finish up. Gather public input, we continue to do that. And I went around and pasted little quarter postcard sized flyers at a lot of businesses around town. I put them under a lot of windshield or window wipers and dropped them off in a lot of businesses. So I think I distributed about 120 of those on a Friday a couple weeks ago. Also, we have to prepare some code language, and that's ongoing. Like I said, 3 or 4 of them have been prepared, but the other 3 still need some significant work and discussion. So that's it for tonight, unless you have some suggestions or questions.
I got a couple thoughts, but I want to let Sam and Jason speak up first.
Well,
Yeah.
I was
This is
gonna,
sorry.
no, go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, this sounds pretty exciting. I like everything that's, is proposed, especially the ADU ordinance. I recall working with an ADU ordinance that wasn't particularly friendly to, basically it was difficult to administer. So eventually it was, revised and rewritten. So this is good. This is all good. And
It's going to be interesting with the accessory dwelling units. So are we saying that we should handcuff the owner to some extent if the owner leaves the premises? Now they really have two dwelling. They have your home and the accessory dwelling unit. What do other jurisdictions do?
we wouldn't, I think the point is that they wouldn't behold the owner to live there or be able to at least sell the ADU to not just a relative. Is that what I gather is being proposed?
I mean, my understanding is that other jurisdictions that allow ADUs, like, effectively don't have any requirements about being owner occupied. It's just, either you can build an ADU or you can't. And
Yeah,
what
so
you do with it is
just a question. So say I built an ADU, my mother-in-law lives there, she passes away. Can I rent it?
Mhm.
Can I leave and rent both the house and the ADU to separate people?
Currently in Woodland you couldn't, but I think we're talking about changing that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out.
Part of the reason why this is an interesting discussion is because, Sam, let's take, for example, that you built that ADU for your mother-in-law, and it ends up that your son lives in it. And then you decide to retire and you RV down to Mexico during the summer. If you were to rent your house out as the owner of the property, that would be a problem under our current ADU code because your son lives in the ADU, but he's not the owner of the property.
Right.
So it's kind of a ridiculous issue that now you're renting both the ADU to your son and the house to a renter for 6 months. Now you're in violation of the accessory dwelling unit code. That seems kind of ridiculous. And how this actually came up is I was at a tiny home presentation, and the kind of work that they're doing with these tiny homes and container homes, they have some really neat designs out there now. And so you could move in and, a tiny home that is nicer than your actual home, and you could live in the accessory dwelling unit and rent your house as opposed to renting the ADU. Or if your son is living in the ADU, if they are not the registered owner, now our code creates a code enforcement situation. So there's a lot of reasons why we can make some changes to our code to create incentives for people to bring in really cool little homes and fill in their backyards. So that's, I think, what we want to go to. So while we're fixing that, we'll add some other incentives.
Great. Any other thoughts before I spout off a little bit? Try to keep it under control. Okay, so I'm really excited about this stuff, and I think the work you're doing is great. I guess I just kind of had some thoughts, general thoughts, and a couple more specific things. But I want to start with this sort of like guiding principle that I think has been helpful for me to think about. And I didn't come up with this. This is a fellow named Chuck Marone says this all the time, but he says, no neighborhood should experience radical change. And I think that's really important. And that's what existing residents are scared of, right? They're scared of their, neighborhood changing overnight. They're scared of an apartment building going up next door, or a shopping center or something, or they're scared of a whole new development in the backyard. And I think that's reasonable. I think we should, try to avoid radical changes like that. But the second half of that is that no neighborhood should be exempted from change. Because, cities change. Change is something we have to deal with, and we are, basically restricted under the law that, we have to allow change. And we need to accommodate growing populations and changing lifestyles. So I think kind of, like holding those two ideas together at the same time, I think can be really helpful. Because we can't just lock our neighborhoods in amber, right? Like that's just, it just won't work. And, that means if we want to keep, if we have to accommodate a growing population, we're just going to expand forever. And that, doesn't make sense and isn't going to work here because we geographically just can't do it. We're hemmed in by geometry. So yeah, that's kind of, I don't know. I think that's kind of an overarching idea that I like to keep in mind and think about things like this. And I think it could be really helpful, both for coming up with ideas and evaluating ideas, but also like that's a pretty easy idea to communicate to just about anybody.
Right.
Which it seems helpful. So kind of like, I guess, moving, directly out of that, I think this idea of incremental development, where instead of, which I would oppose to sort of the standard like subdivision model of development, which is like you just plonk this, 30-acre development down like in a finished state, right? And that's it. And it happens all at once. And that's kind of the development we're familiar with. That's what big developers want to do. That's what the system's kind of set up to allow and encourage, whether it's finance or even our code. It just kind of like that's what gets built, right? And people often object to that, and I think rightly. And I think that also has a lot of negative impacts on our budget down the road. So the idea I like instead is this incremental idea, and one version of that is to like whatever's already built, just allow whatever is the next step of intensity from that, just allow that by right. Like, don't require a rezone, don't require a whole bunch of, bureaucracy that we've been talking about. Just say, if you already have a single family house, you can convert that into a duplex just by right. You can do that. If you already have a duplex, you can convert that into a fourplex. And I think, allowing this sort of thing like allows sort of organic change over time. That's not going to freak anybody out, but really takes advantage of what we've already got. And nobody's neighborhood has to experience this dramatic radical change that freaks everybody out so much. And I don't know, it's a simple idea. And I think ultimately it would simplify our code. I think, making those changes and getting there may or may not be simple. I haven't tried it yet. But I think that idea is worth exploring, not just in our residential zones, but also, potentially in our commercial zones as well. And I think, having some, period of time between, it's like you can't just build a house and then as soon as you build it, turn it into a duplex, right? That would not be in the spirit of, not creating radical change, right? So maybe you say you need 5 years in between those changes. I don't know. That's something we can talk about if it comes fast. But I'm really kind of enamored of that sort of idea right now. The other thing I thought of is, if we're interested in increasing, residential density, I wonder if encouraging more residential above commercial buildings is worthwhile. And maybe we're just not there yet. Maybe we don't have the kind of critical mass to make that happen. But it seems like you know, we got a fair number of commercial development that if it had, you know, some living space above it, like that could house a lot of people in a pretty small space. And I think there's probably demand for that as well. And then not necessarily on the, it doesn't really improve our density, but I think it does would improve the affordability part of the equation that I think is also a goal of this program, is our parking requirements. And for those who haven't been around as long as Travis, Melissa, and Janice have, this is kind of a perennial thing I bring up. But I think, you know, we require people to have parking, right? And not only off street, but also on street, because we require, you know, pretty wide roads. And it seems like that just seems silly. It seems like we're, you know, even if most people would build, you know, off-street parking anyway, even if they weren't required to, I think having the option of it not being there seems important to me, because it seems like we are basically dictating this whole other part of people's lives. We're saying you have to, you know, build, you know, consume a large part of your property on this thing that you may or may not want to do, right? And I don't think that's necessarily, you know, appropriate for the city to be saying to people. That doesn't seem. It seems like, I don't know, just communism for cars, and sort of, you know, not letting the market decide, but dictating what, you know, what has happened, and it makes everything more expensive. And I think that would be a very simple change. And then the smaller roads, you know, I mentioned that already. And there's Travis, I don't know if you're familiar with NACTO, NACTO. So that's I don't remember what it's, National something City and Traffic Organization. Anyway, they have some really great standards for city streets that I think are better than ADJOURN stuff. So maybe check out those. Again, that's, you know, maybe that's a longer term thing than we're talking about right now. I don't know. It seems pretty, you know, they've kind of got their boilerplate down for it already, so it shouldn't be a ton of work if we wanted to, you know, go that route. Yeah, and then stop encouraging, you know, cul-de-sacs and the dendritic pattern, which I think is also really, you know, kneecapping us in this regard. I think that traditional, you know, high connectivity design is much better for getting around. It's better for avoiding traffic. It's better for letting people walk around. And it's just generally nicer. So, all right, that's enough of me spouting off, I guess. So, those are my thoughts. I'm curious if, you know,
Those are good thoughts.
Thanks. Like Travis said, we can't have a real in-depth discussion right now. If anybody has any quick thoughts in response, I would welcome them. Okay. Well, I guess, I don't know. What's next? Do we have anything else to do for this workshop?
So for staff reports, I just needed to give you an update. The City Council considered Kirkland Senior Living Center on Monday, and they voted to not make the comp plan change and the zone change. And so we never got to the site plan discussion Unfortunately, they opted not to make those changes, so that project died kind of a quick death. So
Wow.
the owner is talking about what other options he has for that property. So
Was it a close thing or was it unanimous vote?
5-2 to deny the change. So
That's not that close, I guess.
What were the main concerns for that?
Shame.
So they said it was the right development in the wrong location. They were concerned about the interaction of the pedestrians with the industrial traffic, the heavy and the truck traffics that were on the road. And there was some concern about the potential for parking problems because it was such a small constrained site, and also that with the pedestrians walking around the neighborhood and the pets and the disturbance of neighboring property owners with pets and those kind of issues. So they just felt it was not a good location for that use, but they liked the design, so they're hoping he finds somewhere else in the community to locate it.
Oh, so there's no housing crisis. There's no urgent need for housing or ingenuity or thinking outside the box. Infill.
Some city council vacancies coming up, Jason. Just FYI. Apropos of nothing to do with this conversation. Just thought of that. Sorry, go on, Travis.
Do you want to maybe give an update on the recent construction and openings that are coming soon?
Sorry, Travis, was that for me?
Yeah.
So recent approvals. Let's see, we approved an expansion at the Atlas Yard. They are going to be adding a building there. Let me think. Let me pull up. Belmont RV, I should report, is going to go to the hearing examiner on the 30th. And that is for a proposal to have an RV park on Belmont Loop. So we're working on the staff report right now and a hearing. It would be a conditional use. This property owner also has current approval to have a mini storage at the site. So they're going to decide between the two if they get approval for both projects.
AM/PM looks like it's open today.
Oh, right. And Popeyes is opening very soon. They just got their temporary occupancy.
Correct. And phase 1 of Burrs Creek Mini Storage got an extension on they got their final occupancy today on phase 1. They will be starting construction on phase 2 soon. One of those permits was paid for today.
All right.
These will be paid for soon. We also have 2 new single-family residences under construction on those new lots on CC Street and Washington Street that were created by the recent boundary line adjustment. There will be another single-family residential package submitted for one of those lots very soon.
And then we also have certificate of occupancy recently, I think since last time we met, for Red Leaf Coffee. And so we're starting to see some of these smaller projects come to a point where they're opening doors. We're very hopeful about that.
I understand permits applications will be submitted soon for Del Taco, also at the near the Popeyes.
Getting all the chains.
And then we also had we're also looking at a potential expansion to the tap room brewery. I'm sorry, Melissa, you'll have to drop the name for me at IGS.
Antidote.
Yes. So they are looking at potentially expanding to the 2nd floor. So hopefully that means they're doing good and need more room.
Which is this? Where is this?
The IGS building, which is the industrial grow company. It used to be that yellow fishing rod store, and it was torn down, and they built a new front to that building there. So it's on
Atlantic.
It's on Atlantic to the hotel.
It's a brew pub where we're having our next commission meeting, I think, isn't it?
Perfect.
So yeah, so we're starting to see some stuff opening up. Hopefully that's a good sign that we're getting past this pandemic and these small businesses are able to open their doors.
All right, yeah, that is great news. Okay, well, any final thoughts from staff or commission? Looks like we're gonna come in before 9 o'clock. All right, great work, everybody. I know that was kind of a light one, but still a lot of work that goes into it, and appreciate you commissioners giving up your Thursday night and staff for all your work. And Joe, thanks for listening. Yeah, unless anyone objects, I think we can adjourn. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great
Bye-bye.
job.
April 15th. See you then.
All right, until then, I'll be a year older by then.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, then, Tel.
All right, thank you. All right, good night, everybody.
Bye now.
Night.
They want to put an RV park?
A